It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Phil. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
Welcome to U of L Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Phil. Hope you'll stick around for the next half hour or so where we'll have some interesting topics with some folks from the University of Louisville talking about them. But before we get rolling here, I want to talk to you about the solar eclipse, which is coming up on Monday, August 21st. U of L's got a couple of things going on. Folks from the planetarium are going to be over at the State Fair with WDRB meteorologist in the North Wing lobby, and they're going to have a solar eclipse event there. There's going to have the virtual live fly-throughs of the portable planetarium that U of L has from 1:30 to 2:45, and they're also going to have some experts from U of L over there to talk about the eclipse and what's going on. That's all on Monday, August 21st, over at the fairgrounds, and also the planetarium, the Rao Planetarium on U of L's campus, will be open to the public from 12:30 to 3 that day with a live feed from NASA about the solar eclipse. So hopefully you'll check out the solar eclipse with some friends from U of L. All right, on the show today, depression in teenagers. What causes it? What role do school teachers and parents play in identifying kids with depression and helping those kids? We'll have two U of L experts here to talk about that. But first, Heather Felton is a pediatrician with U of L Physicians, ULP, and an assistant professor of pediatrics in the U of L School of Medicine. I like to have her on the show every 6 months or so just to talk about kid-related issues, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Some of the latest studies on kids' health and safety issues. So, Dr. Felton, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
Good to see you. And just so you know, for those of you who are listening on radio, she's dressed in polka dots and black today. So your kids like that, right?
Yes, yeah, very Minnie Mouse today.
Very Minnie Mouse-ish today, that's right. All right, well, let's talk. Let's start with some sleep recommendations. There have been so many different recommendations over the years on how you should put your baby to bed. Mm-hmm. What do you have to say about these?
So one thing that has been pretty stable for the last 20 years or so are the ABCs of safe sleep. So babies should still, any baby under 1 should be on their, they should be alone on their back and in a crib. So some safe, flat sleep service. That has not changed at all. Mm-hmm. What has been up and down over the last year or so is that the AAP put out a recommendation saying that babies should be in the parents' room with them, not in the parents' bed, have their own safe sleeping space, but they should be sharing a parent's room with them for the first year. Now, they had been recommending up to 6 months, and then they extended it. Then another study came out from Penn State that said, wait a second, the risk of SIDS really falls down pretty substantially after about 6 months, so why are they recommending those extra 6 months of room sharing? And what they found is that, I don't know if you know this or not, but like babies are not always the best sleepers.
No, I know that. My second didn't sleep until he was 2.5 years old.
They tend to be, even when they're asleep, they can be loud, right? They grunt, they roll over, they make noises, they move, and parents are always hyper vigilant to this. What's going on with the baby now? So nobody was getting very good sleep. And if everybody is tired, it kind of sets up this dependence between parents and child, the child's also going to be developing separation anxiety, so moving them out later can be harder for that reason if you wait until after 1. So a lot of interesting things. And then parents who are sleep deprived also tend to say, like, okay, just get them out of their crib, bring them in bed with me, we'll snuggle and fall asleep, which is still a little bit dangerous. So what they recommended was, like, the first 6 months, yes, room sharing is fine. After that, it's okay to move them back into their own room. So the AAP hasn't officially reversed its stance on that, but these were the two kind of conflicting reports that came out over the last year that made it a little bit confusing.
But you're telling parents, keep them in the room until...
At least for 6 months.
Really? We didn't do that with our kids.
So now what we recommend is...
Did you do that with your kids?
I did.
But you got little ones,
I do. So I have little ones. And this is why it's confusing, is because the recommendations change all the time. So even between siblings, I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And this came out in the middle between the two. Like, I just had my second daughter. And it's like, okay, a new recommendation. Like, really? Yeah. Already? Yes, it happens that fast. But that's what makes it confusing. As long as you follow still the ABCs of safe sleep, alone, on the back, in a crib, then that's really what's important.
That's the big stuff. Mm-hmm. All right. We're talking to Dr. Heather Felton. She's a U of L pediatrician. By the way, if you got a kid and want to go see Dr. Felton,
absolutely,
they can track you down, right?
Yes, they can. Yeah, we are located on Eastern Parkway. U of L has 2 other general pediatric offices, one downtown and one on Stone Street.
All right. Avoiding dog bites.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I've got.
What should you teach your kids about dogs? I mean, we
they're
want
all
them to play with the family dog and
Absolutely,
stuff.
yeah. Play with the dog. Take him for a walk. It's great exercise. But you do want to talk to them about safety with any dogs that you may have at home, but also with dogs that they may encounter at the park or taking a walk. So you want to teach, as far as like interacting with dogs that they don't know, not the family dog, but make sure that they know, ask the dog's owner if it's okay to pet them, because maybe this is an anxious dog. Maybe they would prefer not to be touched, and so that's something that we shouldn't do right now. But always teach them, like, ask the adult, is it okay to pet the dog? Don't run up to the dog. Don't put out this kind of threatening appearance that the dog may become more nervous or may act aggressively towards. And as far as your family dog, teach them, if they're playing with a toy, don't take it away. Don't mess with their food. Those are always what we call kind of like
stuff.
Provoked dog bites, where they're just a little bit protective of this. The dog doesn't want you to mess with them right now.
You see very many dog bites in your office?
I see kind of the follow-up. Oftentimes what happens is they will take them to the ER first because they wanted to know if they have stitches. Usually you actually don't need stitches. It can be kind of a dirty wound, and so they do leave it open.
Clean it out.
You need to clean it out. You may need antibiotics. If there is concern about like a broken bone or anything like that, because some dog bites can be very hard, then that would need to go to the ER for x-rays. But I do often see like the follow-up for it.
No fruit juice. What's the deal with that?
So I always say that juice is nature's way of getting you to eat your minerals and vitamins and nutrients. And when you make juice, you squeeze out all the sugar and you throw all the good stuff away. So juice really is just flavored sugar water. It does a great job advertising that, like, this is something really healthy. This is your fruit serving for the day. It's not. If you need fruit, eat fruit. I don't recommend juice for anybody. Most pediatricians hate juice.
But it's an easy one for parents to give the kids a little apple juice or something that they like.
It's not bad. It's not it's just not an everyday kind of thing. It's not a with every meal kind of thing. Don't drink juice all day long. Not only is it bad because there's a lot of sugar in it, but you also run the risk for things like dental caries and cavities, especially if you're drinking it out of a sippy cup. It tends to just kind of hang out in the mouth and is really bad for the teeth.
Well, I saw this study. I'm looking to see who it's from. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no juice for kids up to age 1, I think, wasn't it? And that
yeah, absolutely none. Yeah. So either formula or breast milk for the first 6 months, and then afterwards you can have some sips of water with meals. But really, formula, breast milk, or water for the first year, and that's it.
Sorry, parents.
Yeah.
not the easy fix.
Kids don't know what they're missing. That's the nice thing, is that, like, if you never even start it, they don't even know that that's an option. So stick with these two, and it never even becomes a fight.
Okay. Well, that's easy to say, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're trying to resolve a problem with the child. Here, take some apple juice, right? Let's talk about organic foods. I've got a niece and her husband who just had a baby, and they are trying to go with all organic foods. I guess toddler's about 14 months now. They're trying to do the organic food thing. Is that worth the trouble for kids?
It's a tricky one, and because there's not like a quick answer, it's more of like it depends. So what does organic mean to this company, to this store where you're buying it from? Does that mean no chemicals? Does that mean
that's what they're
no
shooting
GMO? Right, and so that's not always what it means. So you want to really research the company where you're buying your produce from, and also the store where you're buying from. I find, and this is more kind of anecdotal in my own experience, but shopping from like local farmers markets, especially this time of year, is really great. If that's kind of the route that you're wanting to go, you probably end up saving a little bit of money doing it that way too, versus at some of like the big organic food stores.
Right. But is there a health benefit to that? Have there been any studies that have shown,
It's still been controversial. So as far as things as like, chemicals and GMOs, there's not a huge benefit of like taking that
kids
from
down
your
the
diet.
road,
Yeah,
have health effects, those
we
kind of things.
We have been using it for years, and so far we haven't had any related side effects to it.
All right, school vaccinations. Well, you got to have vaccinations for school, no matter where you're going. In public school, the schools have started, I think, in Shelby County and some in southern Indiana already. Jefferson County's ready to start here pretty quick. You've got to have vaccinations for school, but there is an opt-out for parents, correct? for some.
There is, yeah. So there's a special form that you would have to sign, and it depends on the reason for opting out. So if it is a medical exemption form, because I have children who cannot receive certain vaccines, and so that's something, take it to your doctor. There is also a religious exemption form. That's not a form that I sign because I'm not an expert in religion, so I usually ask that they take that to their religious leader for that.
Right. But what's your recommendation as a pediatrician with these parents that come and say, hey, I've heard this stuff in the news about some of these vaccinations. I'm a little antsy about it, that they may impact my child's health, or they could get autism, or you've heard
All kinds of different things.
Kinds of different
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely.
What do you tell them?
I recommend for anybody to have kind of a detailed conversation about specifically what is your concern about each vaccine and each vaccine component, because it's not always every single vaccine, but what have you heard? Where did you hear it from? And then I can point you to some reputable sources and say, like, well, let's try out the CDC website. Let's try out the American Academy of Pediatrics website. Let's trust the doctor that you chose about vaccines. And so there are a lot of things out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And so if you have a specific concern, I'm very happy to address that and say, this is why I recommend this vaccine. This is why I recommend it now and not delaying it for later. These are the rumors and things that have been out there about this vaccine. And then we can talk about, is there any validity to it? Is this just something that somebody made up? But we can kind of go over each one of your concerns and address why it's important. I think one thing, too, that's really interesting is that Kentucky passed this year that hepatitis A is going to be required for school starting next year, and then also a second Menactra, which protects against a bacteria that can cause meningitis in older children. And so it used to be only required at 11. It's also required at 16 now.
Okay, so that's a bunch of shots that kids are going to have to get between the time they show up for school.
Kind of, but we do a nice thing of putting them in combination. So
Right.
we vaccinate against like a bunch of different, so like the kindergarten
MMR.
shots. We all think of that, right? And so like, oh, you got to come and get all these kindergarten shots. At our office, you get two pokes going into kindergarten because your MMR with the varicella is all in one, and then your DTaP, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and polio are all in one.
Okay.
So like your big kindergarten shots, it's just 2 pokes. It's really not that bad.
So not too bad. I want to ask you one more about vaccinations. HPV vaccine for girls when they hit 11 or 12 before they're sexually active. What do you tell parents about those?
I recommend it for everybody. My
Boys
daughters
too?
are for boys too, for a couple of different reasons. So it does protect against cervical cancer in women, and that was when the vaccine was when it first came out. That was what everybody was saying about it. Boys are also carriers of it, and so they said, well, we should probably get all the boys still to protect the girls. Now they're finding that it actually protects against like anal cancer, some head and neck cancers. I think they're doing research right now that's looking to see whether this could be a cause of prostate cancer too. So it may have lots of benefit for the boys. There is also a lot of like nervousness and misinformation out there about the HPV vaccine. It's not that new anymore, really. It has been out there for a couple of years. And so it's nice once it's been there out in the public for a little while and you say, are we seeing these problems that people are concerned about? Not really. And so that should also provide a level of comfort. They also took the recommendations for it down from 3 vaccines to only needing 2 that will still provide immunity, which is also very nice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Dr. Heather Felton, it is always great to have you on the show. You're terrific.
Good to be here.
So
Thank
if people
you.
want to track down, you're looking for a pediatrician, Dr. Heather Felton with ULP. How do we know when teenagers go from disinterested teen to depressed teenager? What can parents and teachers do to help kids who show depressive symptoms? And what role does corporal punishment play in teens' mental health? Patrick Posel is a professor in the Department of Counseling and Human Development at the College of Education at UofL, and Shelby Burton is a graduate assistant in the College of Education, and they're here to talk about those subjects. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good to have you.
morning.
Good to have you. So, Shelby, you're a graduate assistant, right?
I am, yeah. I am a third year. I'm going into my third year of my doctorate, and
Doctorate in what?
in counseling psychology.
Okay. And Patrick, you've been at the U for how long?
Wow, 10 years now.
Oh wow, you've been here forever.
Yes.
Okay. You're a long timer. All right. Well, let's talk about this. You did a study. Both of you did a study when you followed, I guess, about 1,500 teenagers, right? So tell us about that study, and it was on depression in kids. And what did you find? What was the study? What did you find?
It's actually very nice. It's a data set that Australian colleagues kind of borrowed to us, so we could use that. And they basically followed exactly what you say. 1,500 kids, a couple of hundred teachers in 23 schools, 3 Australian states across. Basically, they followed them for 5 years and looked in a whole bunch of variables, but including actually social support from parents, social support from teachers and from peers.
Okay.
And basically looked into how the social support impacts depressive symptoms.
When we talk about depressive symptoms, you're talking about students in classes in
Yes.
Australia. What are we talking about? I mean, what is a depressive symptom? How do you know when you see one?
That's actually quite complicated because
oh, great! I'll
no,
never understand it.
seriously,
Okay.
seriously. So in psychology, we quite often split, let's say, psychopathology into internalizing and externalizing. And depression is part of internalizing. And the reason why we use that term is basically the most symptoms are in the person. So it's not necessarily so easy to observe. So as teacher or parent, you might more experience actually that your kid withdraws, gets more quiet, maybe change the sleep habits and eating habits, things like that.
Okay, so that's what you were looking for, right?
Yes.
How are these
Correct.
kids reacted in the classroom?
Yes.
All right. Well, what did this study find? You did these 1,500 kids, ages 11 to 16, and you looked at how they were basically treated in the classroom, what the teachers did in the classrooms, and then how the kids reacted, and what
Kind
were the
of.
symptoms? Okay, so what'd you find?
So, in looking at the 3 different social support areas, we found that when examined individually, they all do contribute to depression, and they predict that later.
What contributes to depression?
Peers, so how they're treated by others in their developmental age range.
So if you got a bunch of 6th graders, in other words, it depends on their peers have an impact on whether they get depressed or not.
Exactly,
Okay.
which seems intuitive. But it's interesting because when you look at all of them, so the peers, the parents, and also the teachers, those 3 sources of support, when you examine them all together, really the one that stands out is parenting, which, as I said, it seems intuitive that maybe peers, as you get older, you hear a lot about peer pressure, different things like that. That actually parents do still, they're getting to their kids, whether they think they are or not.
Yeah.
Really? So, so out of these kids, were there some that they were 13 years old and there were succumbed to peer pressure, or they were getting picked on, and that's when they showed depressive behavior in class? Were there?
Just keep in mind we looked into basically the positive thing. When we
Okay.
talk about predictions, basically more in the sense of a protective factor. So we looked basically, can support from peers, can support from parents, can support from teachers actually, let's say, prevent or reduce the risk to develop depression? That's what we looked into there. We do some other studies where we focus more on parenting and where we focus individually on teaching behavior, where we actually find specific behaviors can actually increase the risk.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here in just a second. We're talking with Patrick Pocell, who's a professor in the Department of Counseling and Human Development at UofL, and also Shelby Burton, who's a graduate assistant and works with Patrick on some studies. When you're talking that many, 1,500 kids that you're looking at, and who has a positive impact on them, you said the parents were the clear winners. All right. So what is the role of a teacher in all of this?
What we do actually in our lab is quite often focusing actually on the teachers and looking, for example, what happens if we take the impact that parents have out of it. They still add actually. So no matter what happens at home, a teacher still can be, to be honest, a risk factor or actually reduce the risk, depending on what they do. So we measure what we call basically teaching behavior. So that's very specific, measurable things. And I think the 2 things that really stand out, if you're organized, if you know actually how to manage your classroom, if you're supportive, then you reduce basically the risk to develop depression. On the other hand, what we call negative teaching behavior, which is basically inconsistent and or threatening behavior, you actually raise the risk that your kids, let's say, at least develop negative affect, maybe even depression.
Really?
It's really impactful.
So when you say those types of behaviors by teachers, what are you talking about? Give me an example of if I was a student and you're the teacher, what might you do that might not help me get past my potential depression, but might hurt me and send me into a depressive state?
So, for example, if a teacher is moody, might be described as moody by their students, and is inconsistently punishing or threatening punishment, but then never really following through, or
actually punishes.
Yeah, punishes, but then it's more severe because it's, the moods are elevated at that point. And when that happens, then the students generally respond pretty negatively.
And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It's the same actually with parenting behavior.
That's what I was just going to say.
Correct.
It sounds like being a parent. When you're in a bad mood, you
Exactly.
pick on your kid, you take it out on your kid. That's
Right.
bad.
Exactly. Exactly. You're not consistent. So it's exactly that. It's a non-consistent world for the kid. So you never know. I go to school. I don't know actually how Shelby as my teacher responds.
Okay.
I come home. I don't know how my mother responds. That's of course a problem.
Right. And when you talked about threatening behavior by teachers, what's threatening behavior by a teacher?
It's not meant in a sense of
Yeah, I know.
like with parenting
I'm gonna
behavior
kill you
when
if
we
you don't
talk.
behave in class.
No, it is basically really what Shelby said. It's more behavior that kind of threatens you with maybe exaggerated responses. So if you don't stop talking with your neighbor, I send you to the principal.
Right. You're listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. We've got Patrick Purcell, a professor at the Department of Counseling and Human Development at the College of Education, and also Shelby Burton, who's a graduate assistant in the College of Education. How does all this impact a kid's education? I mean, you guys are in the College of Education, right? So you've got these studies about what helps kids overcome depressive behavior or overcome depressive behavior based on their peers, parents, and teachers. How does it help or hurt their education based on these behaviors?
Should I start with the teachers?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about the teacher behavior that we measure, I said already we measure basically 4 types, right? 3 of them are quite established actually in the literature to educational psychology. And they're very clearly related to achievement. That's actually kind of the beauty of it. So basically you can go and say, if you're consistent, if you manage your classroom well, that is good for achievement, that's good for well-being of your kids. So it's not actually that we ask teachers to do something on top of it. They're already asked to do a lot.
Right, they are.
So basically what we say is, well, it is not only the achievement, it's also the mental health side. It's basically the same thing.
Okay.
2 sides of the same coin. That's really the beauty of it.
All right. Shelby?
Yeah, exactly. So coming from the mental health standpoint, as we said earlier, the psychopathology of depression includes symptoms like withdrawal. And so when we're promoting mental health, we are really promoting academic success because we're preventing those symptoms, the withdrawal from wanting to do schoolwork, from attending class at all. So different things like that ultimately that are correlated with academic variables.
Concentration is another good
Yeah,
example.
concentration is an excellent example.
All right, I want to go back and talk about something that you mentioned earlier, Shelby. Corporal punishment.
Yes.
It's a controversial subject among parents and teachers, some
Yes.
teachers as well. What would you tell parents about the use of corporal punishment in their home? And how
Don't
it's
do
gonna
it.
impact
Don't do it.
Okay, well,
but-
I'm telling you, you got a
Yeah.
parent here who,
Yeah,
my kids are
definitely.
grown. Brad Noop, who's sitting back here, he's
Right.
got 3 boys, all teenagers.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
So I would say, first of all, when we're measuring corporal punishment, it's anything from belts to whips, different things like that, it's pretty radical.
Right.
And so what I would say from a more developmental perspective is when you're teaching these kids to associate whatever that behavior might be with pain, you're really not teaching them anything. So all they're doing is being afraid, but not really knowing why. So say they break a rule, explaining how the rule was broken, using it as a tool to really come closer in your relationship rather than distance yourself further. That's really what's happening. So the act it sends a bigger message. It's saying, it's fear rather than let's learn and kind of give that constructive feedback.
Right. Patrick,
So-
do you agree with that?
Yes, I would actually add one thing on top of it. Oh, sorry. I would actually add one thing on top of it. When you think about it, we talk teenagers at the moment, more high school group. So they really actually can understand. So going back and explaining actually why you have this rule. So quite often parents respond with corporal punishment basically when they feel they run out of other options. Or actually when
No, I think
they're
that's
actually
right.
overwhelmed, but
Right,
when they
overwhelmed.
run out of options. So, and we learned already earlier, actually your kids of course, they don't behave like this. They don't do the same they do the same in school. They are kind of, oh, you're an adult, I don't listen, but actually they listen. So if you go and explain again, why do you actually have this rule? And at least in most cases, if not in all cases, parents have rules for a good reason, to protect their kids, or to keep basically the household organized, or whatever. There's a reason. If you can convey the reason, it's much easier for a kid to say, yeah, I hate this rule,
Right.
but I get it.
Well, we're talking. You've looked at 11 folks that are ages 11 through 16.
Yes.
That's a little bit different with corporal punishment. Usually, you're talking with younger children. That's the you're saying avoid it in both, but some parents would say, well, my 4-year-old is acting up in the grocery store and won't stop.
Yeah, and things happen.
Yeah.
But really trying your hardest to stay away from it and avoid it is a big message that we're sending.
And the literature is, but shows clearly if you talk about one event where you might slap your kid, it's not that we endorse it, but that's a very different thing from what Shelby just described. A beating with a belt and slapping in the face, it's a very different thing.
I think most folks would agree with that. All right, so final message to parents, teachers, and I guess kids from your studies. What would you tell them about how to avoid depressive behavior and sparking that in a kid?
I think we talked a little bit about teachers. We talked about parents, so we can actually maybe talk about the kiddos. So quite often when you develop symptoms, I think you might assume other people can see this from the outside, and it's really hard. So when you feel down, reach out, talk with people that you trust. And that might be a teacher, that might be the school bus driver, that might be your parents, that might be a friend. Reaching out, talking about it.
Okay.
And I know it's very hard, particularly for teenage boys.
To do that, to admit that there's something wrong with them. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and from a clinical standpoint, just in working, because that's the same population I work with, is teenagers 11 to 16. And a lot of times they describe depression, and then if you put the label on it, they're very resistant. And so I guess I would also tell parents to work with kids to start identifying and labeling emotions so that they don't have a stigma attached to it, and they can say, I'm feeling a little bit depressed. That doesn't mean you have major depressive disorder. And if you do, that's okay too. We cross that bridge when we get to it. But really just
let it out.
Engaging your child and
Very
promoting
good.
that.
All right, Shelby Burton, Patrick Bossell. I pronounced your name correctly?
Yes, you do.
All right,
Thanks
for
very
being on the
much.
show. Appreciate it. Thanks for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert. Go Cards.